Is the motion seconded?
Be in a spirit of bipartisanship to second the motion, Deputy Speaker, and rise to support it. In rising to support this particular motion, which I think is a very worthy motion that's been moved by the member for Dunkley, I think it harkens back to discussions that I had around the kitchen table when I was a young man, which I think many on the other side, and I know the member for Canberra has as well in different ways, but with our parents in terms of history and the lessons you learn from history. There were three things that were mentioned by my father, who recently passed away, about things what not to forget and the great dictators in human history and the impact that totalitarian regimes could have and the people that oversaw those totalitarian regimes. The first one was the Holocaust. The second one was what, in my father's words, the mass murder perpetrated by Joseph Stalin. And the third was the Cultural Revolution led by Mao Zedong, which killed many millions of people. My father raised these issues, Deputy Speaker, and why I'm very happy to speak to these particular issues, because we always must learn from history. As item 7 says in the member that moved this motion, recognises the importance of remembering and learning from such dark chapters in human history to ensure that such crimes against humanity are not allowed to be repeated. And I think that's one of the key reasons why we are here, is to remember. And in remembering and discussing these terrible events that have occurred for many young people that did not live through those experiences, it drives home the importance of why we do need to learn from history, because, Deputy Speaker, if you don't learn from history, you can repeat history. And our question is, do we want to have these very dark chapters in our history, particularly in the 20th century, repeated? So I wish to pay my respects, after speaking on that informally, to the Australian Ukrainians who had family members that had lived through that particular tragedy. As the member said, there is estimated up to about 7 million Ukrainians starved to death as a consequence of Stalin's policies between 1932 and 1933. And it happened, the term as tragedy is used, but I think it was deliberate, began in the chaos of a particular theory of collectivisation, where millions of peasants were forced off their land and made to join state farms. It was then exacerbated in the autumn of 1932, when the Soviet Politburo, the leadership of the Soviet Communist Party, took a series of decisions that deepened the famine in the Ukrainian countryside. According to Anne Applebaum in her article in The Atlantic, at the height of the crisis, organised teams of policemen and local party activists, motivated by hunger, fear and a decade of hateful propaganda, entered peasant households and took everything edible: potatoes, beets, squash, beans, peas and farm animals. At the same time, a cordon was drawn around the Ukrainian Republic to prevent escape. The result was a human catastrophe. At least 5 million people perished of hunger across the Soviet Union. Nearly 4 of them were nearly 4 million Ukrainians who died not because of neglect or crop failure, but because they'd been deliberately deprived of food. And, unfortunately, neither the Ukrainian famine nor the broader Soviet famine was ever officially recognised by the USSR. Inside the USSR at the time, the famine was never mentioned, discussion was actively repressed, statistics were altered to hide it. It's gratifying, for example, though, you can try and cover over these mass crimes against humanity, but eventually they see the light of day, Deputy Speaker. And to those listening in this parliament, it is gratifying, in particular on the 70th anniversary of this very dark chapter in human history, that a joint statement on the Great Famine of 32-33 in the Ukraine, the Holodomor, was issued on the 10th of November 2003 at the United Nations in New York, and the statement noted that in the former Soviet Union, millions of men, women and children fell victims to the cruel actions and policies of the totalitarian regime. The Great Famine took between 7 and 10 million innocent lives and became a national tragedy of the Ukrainian people. Again, Deputy Speaker, the question here, and the reason why we are talking about this and why I commend the member, is that we must remind people that have not lived through this period that human nature does have a very dark side to it. The totalitarian regimes, in their quest to control populations, will embark upon the most inhumane measures that we can possibly think of. And again, to remind people that when you have a totalitarian regime, these things can happen. We must never forget this, and we never will, Deputy Speaker.
I thank the member for Holt.